My name is Elena, and I'm 44 years old. For most of my life, I've worn two titles, mother and survivor. I raised my daughter, Tessa, mostly on my own after her father, Paul, walked out on us when she was 14. He left for another woman, and I spent years trying to piece together a version of stability from the fragments he abandoned. It wasn't perfect, but it was ours. At least until Tessa grew old enough to start seeing the cracks I had tried so desperately to hide. 3 years ago, everything between us broke for good. We had one last terrible fight after Paul's funeral, a fight that still echoes in my chest. Tessa blamed me for everything, for the divorce, for her father's depression, even for his death. Nothing I said mattered. She didn't want to hear explanations. She wanted someone to hate, and I was the only one left standing. When the phone rang that Thursday morning, I didn't recognize the number at first. I almost didn't answer. But something inside me, that small whisper of hope every mother carries for her child, made me swipe to accept. "Hi, Mom." Those two words made my heart stop. I hadn't heard her call me that in years. Her voice trembled slightly, but she was composed, too composed. She said she wanted to invite me to Thanksgiving dinner, that she and her husband, Derek, were hosting a small family gathering at their home outside the city. Her words were polite, deliberate, almost rehearsed. I didn't know what to say. I think I just stuttered something about how surprised I was. How I'd love to come. She thanked me and hung up before I could ask anything more. The call lasted less than 2 minutes, but when I looked down at my phone afterward, my hands were shaking. It didn't feel like reconciliation, it felt like a transaction. I called my best friend, Sophie, later that day. She's the kind of person who believes every broken relationship can be repaired with enough grace and time. "Maybe. This is her way of extending an olive branch," she said. "You should go, Lena. Don't let the past keep you from trying." I wanted to believe that. God, I did. I told myself that maybe Tessa was finally ready to forgive me, that the holidays had softened her heart. But the truth was, my daughter had always been unpredictable, and pain changes people in ways love can't always fix. That night, I found myself standing in the kitchen, staring at a photo of us from years ago, her 10th birthday. She had her arms around my neck, smiling wide with frosting on her cheeks. I ran my thumb over the image and whispered, "Please, let this be real." I didn't want another disaster. I just wanted my daughter back. The days that followed were filled with nervous energy. I cleaned my house as if someone important were coming, even though no one was. I bought a new dress, something modest but elegant, in a deep burgundy color Tessa always said looked good on me. I even planned to bake her favorite cranberry pie, the one we used to make together every Thanksgiving before everything went wrong. It felt symbolic, like maybe, if I could bring something sweet to the table, she'd remember the good in us again. But every time I thought about her tone on that call, that stiffness in her voice, my stomach twisted. It didn't sound like forgiveness. It sounded like control. I tried to push the thought away, but it kept resurfacing in small moments when I'd stop at a red light, when I folded laundry, when I caught my reflection in the mirror and saw the worry lines deepening around my mouth. On Sunday, I received a text from Derek. "Looking forward to seeing you on Thursday at 6 p.m. It read, "Please bring whatever dish you'd like." His tone was formal, almost businesslike. No warmth, no casual family familiarity, just confirmation and politeness. I typed back a short thank you and stared at the screen for several minutes after hitting send. Derek had never really liked me. He'd always been polite but distant, respectful in that way people are when they're tolerating someone out of necessity. Sophie called again later that night. She asked if I was nervous. I laughed and said yes. But beneath the laughter was a feeling I couldn't name. It wasn't just fear, it was anticipation mixed with dread. Like standing on the edge of something I didn't understand. She told me to bring wine and a smile, to walk in with love and let go of the past. I promised I would. On the morning of Thanksgiving, I woke up early and started baking. The smell of the cranberry pie filled my kitchen, reminding me of simpler times when Tessa would sit on the counter, swinging her legs and licking the spoon. I smiled through the ache in my chest. I wanted to believe that some memories could be stronger than the pain that followed them. When the pie cooled, I wrapped it carefully, placed it in a tin, and packed it into the passenger seat of my car. I took one last look at my reflection in the mirror before leaving, nervous but hopeful. Maybe tonight would be different. Maybe it was finally time to heal. The drive to Tessa's house felt longer than usual. The roads were lined with bare trees, the sky gray and heavy with the promise of winter. My mind wandered to the argument at Paul's funeral, to the cruel things said, and the way her eyes had looked at me like I was a stranger. I swallowed hard and tightened my grip on the steering wheel. By the time I reached the edge of her neighborhood, my heart was pounding so hard I could hear it in my ears. I parked outside her house and stared at the front door, my breath fogging up the glass. This was it, the moment I'd been hoping for, fearing and dreading all at once. I took a deep breath, picked up the pie, and stepped out of the car. The air was crisp and cold, the kind that bites your skin and wakes you up. I told myself this was a good thing, that I needed this closure, no matter what it looked like. But as I reached for the doorknob, my hand hesitated. Because deep down, something in Tessa's voice from that phone call told me this dinner wasn't about forgiveness at all. Would you like me to continue with Section 2, the wounds that never healed next? You said, Section 2, J. Revenge Stories said, Section 2880 words, the wounds that never healed. I couldn't help but think back to the last time Tessa and I saw each other 3 years ago, when everything between us shattered. It was right after Paul's funeral, a gray, rainy afternoon that matched the heaviness inside me. The church smelled of lilies and wet coats, and I remember clutching the folded obituary in my hands until it tore at the edges. Tessa refused to look at me. She sat in the front pew beside Paul's family, and I sat several rows behind her, invisible in my own husband's farewell. When the service ended, I approached her outside. She turned on me before I could speak. Her voice was loud enough for everyone to hear, trembling with rage. You did this to him, she said. You ruined his life. I tried to explain that she didn't understand, that Paul had made choices none of us could fix, but she wouldn't listen. She walked away, her black dress catching the rain, her heels sinking into the mud as if the earth itself wanted to swallow our relationship whole. That moment marked the end of everything we were. Afterward, I spent months replaying that scene in my mind, analyzing every word, every silence. I asked myself if I could have handled things differently. If maybe I should have told her the full truth about why her father left. But back then, I thought I was protecting her. She adored Paul, and even after he betrayed me, I didn't want to tarnish the version of him she loved. So, I let her believe her story that I was the cold, bitter woman who drove him away. It hurt, but it felt like a sacrifice worth making for her peace. But that silence grew heavier over time. It followed me like a ghost. I began writing letters to Tessa, hundreds of them. Each one started with love, filled with the things I wished I could say to her face. My sweet girl, I would write. One day you'll understand that love isn't always kind. I wrote about the nights I stayed awake, crying after Paul's affair came to light, about how I tried to hold our family together long after it was already broken. But I never sent any of them. They sat in a wooden box under my bed, sealed away like a secret confession. When Tessa invited me to dinner, I wondered if she had finally learned the truth. Maybe someone had told her about Paul's other life, about the woman he chose over us. Maybe that's why she was reaching out to apologize, to start over. But the tone of her voice during that call didn't sound like remorse. It sounded like calculation. Still, I couldn't bring myself to ignore her. She was my daughter. No matter how much she'd hurt me, the love I had for her hadn't changed. It's strange how motherhood works. You can resent your child, even fear them, but deep inside, you'd still walk through fire for them. The closer Thanksgiving came, the more restless I became. I found myself wandering through old photo albums late at night. Pictures of Tessa as a baby, Paul holding her in the hospital, her first day of school with her red backpack. I traced their faces with my finger, remembering how different life had felt back then, how full of hope it once was. Sometimes I'd dream about Paul. In my dreams, he wasn't cruel or distant. He was the man I married, the one who made me laugh until my ribs hurt. Then I'd wake up and remember the betrayal, the phone call from the other woman, the nights he didn't come home, the way he looked at me with pity instead of love. And I'd remember how Tessa's face mirrored his when she screamed at me at that funeral. Maybe, I thought, this dinner could heal those wounds. Maybe it could finally bridge the years of distance and anger. But deep down, I knew scars like ours never truly disappear, they just fade until something rips them open again. A few days before the dinner, I sat at the kitchen table with Sophie over coffee. She noticed how quiet I'd become. "You're overthinking again," she said, smiling softly. "It's just dinner. Go, smile, eat turkey, and let her talk. Sometimes silence heals more than words." I nodded, pretending to agree, but her reassurance didn't touch the unease growing inside me. I couldn't explain it. It was like standing in sunlight, but feeling cold. That night, as I prepared for bed, I caught my reflection in the mirror. I looked older than I remembered. Maybe it was the sleepless nights, or maybe it was the weight of the years between me and my daughter. I touched the wrinkles around my mouth and whispered to myself, "You can do this." But as I lay in the dark, staring at the ceiling, memories crept back like whispers. Paul's laughter with that woman on the phone, Tessa's glare at the funeral, the sound of rain mixing with her words. "You ruined his life." Those memories lived inside me like shards of glass I'd never fully removed. The morning before the dinner, I pulled out one of the unsent letters from the box and reread it. The paper had yellowed slightly, the ink faded in places. It ended with a line I barely remembered writing. "One day, when you see the truth, I hope you'll still see me as your mother." I folded the letter carefully and placed it in my purse. Maybe, I thought, I could give it to her that night if things went well. Maybe it could be the olive branch we both needed. But as I stared at my reflection one last time before leaving for her house, I couldn't shake the unease pressing on my chest. I told myself it was just nerves, that I was afraid of rejection, not danger. Still, there was something in my gut that whispered otherwise, and, despite all the hope I forced myself to feel, a quiet part of me knew this dinner was not going to bring healing. It was going to reopen every wound I'd ever tried to close. Would you like me to continue with Section 3, the preparation and the past next? You said, Section 3J, Revenge Stories said, Section 3910 words. The preparation and the past. The week before Thanksgiving, I threw myself into preparations as if it were a test I couldn't afford to fail. I spent hours cleaning, polishing, and organizing things that no one but me would ever notice. Maybe I was trying to convince myself that if everything around me looked perfect, then I could somehow control the imperfections inside my life. I dusted every corner, replaced the old curtains, even rearranged the living room furniture like I was preparing for company I desperately wanted to impress. The truth was, I didn't know what to expect from this dinner. Tessa hadn't spoken to me in 3 years, and now suddenly, she wanted me there at her home, with her husband, for Thanksgiving. It didn't make sense. Still, I clung to that fragile thread of hope that maybe, just maybe, she was ready to make peace. I took my time shopping for a dress. I chose a simple burgundy one, soft and elegant, something I knew she'd approve of. I could still hear her voice from years ago saying, "That color looks good on you, Mom." I bought new shoes too, even though I knew no one would notice. I wanted to feel like my best self that night, not the broken woman who'd been hiding from her own daughter's hate. In the days that followed, I busied myself with small, sentimental tasks. I pulled out the old recipe book Tessa and I used to use when she was a child, the one with sticky pages and faded ink. I decided to make her favorite cranberry pie. As I mixed the filling, I found myself smiling through tears. For a moment, it felt like she was still that little girl, barefoot on a kitchen stool, covered in flour, asking if she could lick the spoon. I remembered how she used to help me set the Thanksgiving table every year. She'd fold napkins into shapes she'd learned from YouTube videos, swans, flowers, sometimes tiny fans. We'd laugh at our mistakes, and Paul would sneak tastes of food before dinner started, pretending I didn't notice. Those were the years before the affair, before everything cracked. When I think back now, I realize how fragile that peace had been. Paul had started staying late at work, making excuses about deadlines and meetings. I'd believed him at first. But one night, I saw a text pop up on his phone. Just a heart emoji from someone named Caroline. My hands had trembled as I read their messages, each one unraveling the life I thought we had. I never told Tessa. Not then, not even after he left. She was 17, angry, and confused. She loved her father fiercely and blamed me for his absence. And when Paul died a few years later, the resentment hardened into something unbreakable. So, when she called me this year, part of me wanted to believe that she'd learned the truth. Maybe she'd grown older, wiser. Maybe she finally understood that nothing in life is as simple as right or wrong, love or betrayal. But every time I remembered how flat her tone had been on the phone, my stomach tightened. On the night before Thanksgiving, I was sitting at my kitchen table, wrapping the pie in foil, when I got a text from an unfamiliar number. It was short and polite. Looking forward to seeing you tomorrow. 6 p.m. Sharp. It was signed, Derek. I stared at the screen for a while. Uneasy. Derek was always courteous but distant whenever we'd met in the past. There was something about him I could never quite read, too polished, too calm, like someone wearing a mask. I typed back, "Thank you for inviting me. I'll be there," and set my phone down. After that, I couldn't shake the unease building inside me. Why hadn't Tessa texted me herself? Why was Derek the one confirming? I tried to tell myself it didn't mean anything. Maybe she was busy. Maybe he was just helping her organize. But something about it felt calculated. I called Sophie again. She could always sense when I was spiraling. "Lena, you've got to stop reading into everything," she said gently. "You're scared because you love her, that's all. Tomorrow's going to go fine, trust me." "I hope so," I said. Something doesn't feel right." "You're just nervous," she replied. "Go, smile, and let it happen. Don't overthink." After we hung up, I stood at the window, watching the cold November wind sway the trees. I wanted to believe Sophie was right, but my instincts whispered otherwise. When I woke up on Thanksgiving morning, the world outside was quiet and gray. I spent the morning dressing carefully, curling my hair, putting on the small gold earrings Paul once gave me, the ones Tessa used to play with when she was a baby. Every detail felt heavy with meaning. Before leaving, I took one last look around my house, the framed photos, the half-read books, the empty coffee cup on the counter. I thought of all the years Tessa had spent here before she left. I hoped walking into her home that night would feel like walking toward reconciliation, not judgment. I picked up the pie, warm and fragrant, and carried it to my car. The drive felt endless. The roads were familiar but lonely, winding through bare trees and fading daylight. I kept rehearsing what I'd say when I saw her. "You look beautiful. I've missed you. I'm proud of you." Simple words, but somehow the hardest ones to say. As I turned onto her street, I saw her house come into view, a large, neat home with trimmed hedges and warm light spilling from the windows. My chest tightened with both pride and pain. She had built a beautiful life, one I hadn't been part of. I parked at the curb and sat there for a long moment, gripping the steering wheel, willing myself to move. The house looked calm, inviting. But behind that calm, I sensed something darker, something waiting for me. And though I didn't know it yet, that dinner table was already set for betrayal, not reunion. "Would you like me to continue with Section 4, the arrival next?" You said, Section 4J Revenge Stories said, Section 4930 words. The arrival. When I pulled up to Tessa's house that chilly evening, I could already sense something was off. The first thing I noticed was the silence. Thanksgiving evenings were never quiet, usually filled with laughter, music, and the comforting chaos of family. But here, everything felt muted. The only sounds were the crunch of my shoes on the gravel and the faint rustle of leaves caught in the wind. Her house was beautiful, larger than I remembered from the photos she'd sent years ago. 2 stories, soft gray siding, a front porch strung with golden fairy lights that flickered faintly in the dark. But there was something sterile about it. No wreath on the door, no smell of roasted turkey wafting through the air, just stillness. I balanced the cranberry pie in my hands and rang the bell. It took a long time before anyone answered. When the door finally opened, Derek stood there. He smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. "Elena," he said, his tone formal, almost rehearsed. "Glad you could make it." I forced a smile back. "Thank you for having me." He stepped aside, and as I walked in, a chill ran through me. The interior was immaculate, modern, polished, everything in place but cold. No laughter, no music, no chatter. The kind of perfection that didn't feel lived in. "Tessa's in the kitchen," he said, his voice distant. "She'll be right out." I nodded and looked around. The table was already set, a long mahogany surface, draped in cream linen, gold-rimmed plates, and tall candles that hadn't been lit yet. But what caught my attention was the seating arrangement. My name was written on a small card at the head of the table. Elegant script. Perfectly placed. Opposite me sat an empty chair. I frowned. "Are we expecting someone else?" Derek's lips curved slightly. "Just family," he said. "We thought it would be meaningful to have everyone together this year." His answer didn't comfort me. If anything, it deepened my unease. A moment later, Tessa appeared from the hallway. For a second, I couldn't breathe. She looked beautiful, older, more mature, her long brown hair swept into soft curls, but there was a distance in her eyes, a kind of careful composure that made my heart ache. "Mom," she said, her voice neutral. Not warm, not cold, just controlled. I stepped toward her, arms open for a hug. She hesitated, but eventually leaned in. The embrace was brief, mechanical, like two strangers mimicking affection. "It's good to see you," I said quietly. "You too," she replied, smiling faintly, though it didn't quite reach her eyes. She took the pie from me, complimented how beautiful it looked, and set it on the counter. "We'll serve it later," she said softly. As I followed her into the dining room, I noticed little things that didn't match her usual taste. No flowers, no decorations, no soft background music like she used to love. The entire atmosphere was too formal, almost staged. Derek poured me a glass of wine. I thanked him and took a small sip, hoping it would ease my nerves. But the air felt thick with something unspoken. I wanted to ask where everyone was. Surely there had to be more guests, but before I could, Tessa interrupted. "We'll start dinner soon," she said. "We're just waiting for one more guest." I blinked. "Oh? Who else is coming?" She smiled faintly. "Someone who wanted to see you." That should have warmed me. But it didn't. It felt ominous. I tried to mask my discomfort, sitting down at the table, smoothing my napkin across my lap to keep my hands busy. The silence between us stretched longer than it should have. I tried to fill it with small talk. "You've made a lovely home," I said. "It's so elegant." "Thank you," Tessa said. "Derek's done most of the decorating." Her tone was polite but detached. She didn't ask about me, my job, or my life. It was as if the past 3 years didn't exist, or worse, as if she already knew everything she wanted to know. When Derek excused himself to check on something in the other room, I leaned toward her and lowered my voice. "Sweetheart, I just want you to know how happy I am to be here. I've missed you every day." Her expression flickered for a second, something soft, something almost human, but then it vanished. "Let's just have a nice dinner tonight," she said. "No past. No drama. Just dinner." It was a kind thing to say, but her tone made it sound like a warning. The clock on the wall ticked steadily, each second dragging. I stared at the empty chair opposite mine again. My mind began to wander. Was it for Paul's memory? A symbolic gesture? Or maybe for someone who couldn't make it? Then, suddenly, the doorbell rang. Tessa and Derek exchanged a quick glance. It was brief, but in that look, something shifted. My stomach knotted instantly. "I'll get it," Derek said. He walked out of the room, and for a few seconds, I sat frozen in my chair. Tessa kept her eyes on the table, her fingers tightening around her wine glass. The sound of the door opening reached my ears, followed by a deep, unfamiliar voice greeting Derek. I couldn't make out the words. "Who's that?" I asked softly. Tessa didn't answer. She just stared at her plate, her jaw tense. Then I heard footsteps approaching, the heavy, deliberate kind that echoed across the hardwood floor. Derek reappeared, and behind him walked a man I hadn't seen in years. My breath caught in my throat. He looked older, heavier, his expression cold and judgmental. For a moment, I couldn't speak. The pie, the hope, the fragile peace I'd been clinging to, it all vanished in an instant. Tessa stood up, her voice calm and clear. "Mom," she said. "You remember Uncle Richard, don't you?" And as he smiled at me with the kind of satisfaction only resentment can bring, I finally understood this wasn't a family dinner. It was an ambush. "Would you like me to continue with Section 5, the unwanted guest, next?" You said, Section 5J Revenge. Stories said, Section 5880 words, the unwanted guest. Standing in the doorway was a face I never thought I'd see again, Paul's brother Richard. Time had not softened him. His hair was thinner, his shoulders broader, but that sharp, bitter glare was exactly the same. The last time I saw Richard was at Paul's funeral the same day Tessa disowned me. He'd been cruel then, spitting accusations in hushed tones about how I broke Paul's spirit. Seeing him now, standing in my daughter's home, sent a jolt of disbelief and dread down my spine. He smiled tightly as he walked in, his eyes sweeping over me like I was an exhibit under glass. "Elena?" he said slowly, dragging out my name as if it tasted bad. "It's been a long time," I swallowed hard. "Yes, it has." Tessa gestured for him to sit, her expression unreadable. "I thought it would be good to have everyone together," she said. "For closure." Closure? The word felt sour on my tongue. "Tessa, I didn't know Richard would be here." Her gaze flicked toward me briefly, then back to her wineglass. "I wanted it to be a surprise." I looked between them, confused and growing more uneasy by the second. Richard took his seat across from me directly in the empty chair that had been waiting all along. I realized, with a cold shiver, that the entire table had been arranged around this moment. Derek returned to his spot beside Tessa, silent but alert. His demeanor was polite, but his eyes were sharp, watchful, like someone monitoring a performance they'd rehearsed. I tried to keep my composure. "It's been a difficult few years," I said softly. "But I'm grateful to be here. I hope tonight we can just—" Richard cut me off with a scoff. "Grateful? That's rich, coming from you." "Excuse me?" He leaned forward, his elbows on the table. "Do you have any idea what your husband went through before he died? The kind of pain he was in because of you?" The words hit me like a slap. "Richard." "No," he snapped. "You don't get to play the victim. You pushed him to the edge. Everyone knew it. He just couldn't take it anymore." I glanced at Tessa, expecting her to defend me or at least stop him, but she didn't. She sat there silently, her eyes glistening with restrained emotion. Derek placed a hand on her shoulder, like he was steadying her for something. "Richard," I said quietly, trying to keep my voice from shaking. "You weren't there. You don't know what happened in my marriage. I know Paul was miserable. I know he came to me crying more than once because of how cruel you were to him. And I know you didn't even let Tessa see him before he died." "That's not true," I snapped. "I tried to protect her from—" "From what?" Richard interrupted. "From the truth?" The room went silent except for the ticking of the clock on the wall. My throat tightened as I turned to Tessa. "Sweetheart? You know that's not what happened. I never stopped you from seeing your father." Her lips quivered slightly, but she didn't meet my eyes. "Uncle Richard showed me things, Mom. Messages, emails, things Dad sent before he died. He was trying to reach out to me, but you blocked him. You told him not to contact me." My pulse began to race. "What? No. That's not Tessa, that's not true. Who told you that?" "I saw the proof," she said, her voice shaking now. "I saw the messages." I looked at Richard, realization dawning slowly, painfully. "You're the one who showed her, aren't you?" He didn't deny it. He just smiled cold and smug. She deserved to know what kind of mother she had. My breath caught. "You forged those messages, didn't you?" You've always hated me. You would do anything to poison her against me. Tessa slammed her hand on the table, her eyes flashing with tears. Stop lying, Mom, I've seen them. Dad said you threatened to ruin him if he didn't stay away. I felt the ground tilt beneath me. Tessa, listen to me. Your father, he wasn't the man you thought he was. Richard let out a sharp laugh. Here it comes the excuses. I turned toward Derek, desperate for someone to see reason. Derek, you know this isn't true. Please tell her. But Derek said nothing. His face was expressionless, his hands folded neatly on the table. For the first time, I realized he wasn't a bystander in this. He was part of it. The room grew unbearably tense. The candles flickered. I could hear my heartbeat pounding in my ears. Tessa's voice cracked as she whispered, You destroyed him, and now you're trying to destroy his memory too. I shook my head, tears stinging my eyes. No, sweetheart, he destroyed himself, he cheated, he lied. I stayed because I loved him. I stayed for you. Richard's expression hardened. Liar. Tessa's face twisted with confusion and pain. Stop. Both of you. Just stop. But I could see it. The damage was already done. She believed them. Whatever hope I'd carried into this house was crumbling fast. I tried to stand, to walk away from the table, but Derek's voice stopped me cold. You should sit down, Elena, he said quietly. We're not finished yet. There was a shift in Slew's. His tone something darker. Something that made my stomach twist. I sat back down slowly, staring at him. What do you mean? Richard leaned back in his chair, smiling faintly. We have something to show you, he said. And when he pulled out a thick folder and laid it on the table between us, his next words made my blood run cold. We have proof. Would you like me to continue with Section 6, the accusation next? You said, Section 6J Revenge Stories said. Section 6890 words. The accusation. The word proof echoed in my head like a death sentence. Richard slid the folder across the table toward me with deliberate precision, his eyes never leaving mine. My hands trembled as I reached for it. The folder was thick, too thick for comfort, its edges creased and stained, like it had been handled over and over again. Inside were neatly printed pages, each one clipped together and labeled. My heart pounded as I flipped through the first few sheets. They were emails. Dozens of them. Each one supposedly written by me to Paul's mistress, Caroline. The words were cruel, vicious, filled with jealousy, hatred, and threats. My name was in the signature line. My email address sat right there at the top. But I knew instantly, without doubt, that I had never written a single one. What is this? I whispered. Your words, Richard replied. Your true self. Exposed. I looked up, my voice shaking. These are fake. I've never written anything like this in my life. Tessa's eyes glistened with tears as she stared at me from across the table. Mom. They're dated from the year before Dad died. He told me you'd been sending messages like these. I didn't believe him at first. But Uncle Richard found them after everything. I shook my head, flipping through page after page, my stomach twisting into knots. The emails described me as a bitter, unhinged woman accusing Caroline of stealing my husband, threatening to ruin Paul's reputation, and even implying that I would make him pay for leaving. It was like reading the diary of a stranger wearing my name. These are lies, I said firmly. Someone made these up, Richard scoffed. Oh please, Elena. You think we're idiots? These came from Paul's personal archive. Straight from his old account. Derek helped me access them. My eyes snapped to Derek. You went through Paul's old emails? Derek met my gaze calmly, as though this were all perfectly reasonable. Tessa asked for help, verifying some things. He said smoothly. I hired a private investigator. Everything checks out. Private investigator? I repeated, stunned. You hired someone to investigate me? Tessa's voice cracked. What was I supposed to do, Mom? Pretend I didn't see it? Pretend you didn't drive him to his death? Her words sliced through me. I felt physically sick. Tessa, I whispered, tears spilling over. I never threatened your father. I loved him. Even after he betrayed me, I. Richard slammed his hand on the table, making me jump. Stop lying. You're a manipulative, jealous woman who couldn't stand losing control. You destroyed him, and now you want to destroy what's left of his memory. I stared at him, trembling with rage and disbelief. You think I wanted him gone? He was the father of my child. You think I'd ever hurt him? He sneered. You already did. The room fell silent except for Tessa's quiet sobbing. I wanted to reach across the table, to hold her, to tell her everything the truth about Paul's affair, about how I'd kept quiet only to protect her. But looking at her now, I realized it was too late. The damage had already been done. The lies had rooted themselves deep, twisting her love into resentment. I forced myself to breathe, to steady my voice. Tessa, I said softly, I know you think this is the truth, but please, listen to me. Paul was having an affair with Derek's mother. He left me for her. That's why your uncle hates me. That's why all of this is happening. They're trying to punish me for something I didn't do. Derek's expression didn't even flicker. He just watched me with unnerving calm. Tessa, though, looked stunned, confused. What are you talking about? Ask him, I said, pointing at Derek. Ask your husband who his mother was seeing before Paul died. Derek finally spoke, his tone measured. Don't drag my mother into your fantasies, Elena. She was a victim in all of this. Richard leaned forward, smirking. You see? You can't even tell the truth when it's staring you in the face. The world around me felt like it was spinning. I could barely think, barely breathe. This isn't real, I whispered. This entire thing has been orchestrated. You're setting me up. Richard shrugged. Believe what you want. But the truth is out now. Everyone knows what you did. I stood up abruptly, my chair scraping the floor. I didn't do anything, I shouted, my voice cracked under the weight of desperation. You're twisting everything. You're trying to destroy me. Tessa flinched at my tone, her face crumpling. Please stop, Mom, I can't do this. I took a step toward her, pleading. Tessa, please, look at me. You know me. You know I would never. Derek rose from his seat, placing himself between us. That's enough, he said sharply. You've done enough damage for one lifetime. For a moment, no one moved. The air felt thick, heavy with decades of resentment and lies. My breath came in ragged gasps as I looked from Tessa to Derek to Richard, realizing I was outnumbered, cornered in a house that wasn't mine, in a story I no longer recognized. Tessa wiped her eyes and whispered, I think you should go. Her words hit harder than any accusation. You're sending me away? I asked weakly. I need time to think, she said, her voice trembling. Richard leaned back with a satisfied smirk, like a man watching a chess game he'd already won. As I gathered my coat with shaking hands, I could feel their eyes on me, their judgment, their disgust, their victory. I reached the doorway and paused, turning back to look at my daughter one last time. Tessa, I said softly. Whatever you think you know, it's not the truth. Please, don't let them poison you. She said nothing. And just before I stepped outside, I caught Derek's reflection in the glass door behind me, his expression calm, almost smug, as if everything had gone exactly as he planned. And in that single look, I realized something chilling. Derek wasn't just part of this. He was the one pulling the strings. Would you like me to continue with Section 7, The Secret Within the Marriage next? You said, Section 7 J Revenge Stories said, Section 7910 words, The Secret Within the Marriage. It was Derek, he was the one behind everything. The moment his eyes met mine at that door, I felt it. That quiet confidence. That hint of satisfaction, it wasn't just smugness. It was ownership. He was the architect of this whole performance, and I had walked straight into his trap without even realizing it. I drove home that night in stunned silence. The road lights blurred through my tears, the rain tapping against the windshield like a cruel metronome. My thoughts spiraled around Derek, his controlled calm, his manipulative charm, his calculated silence during every accusation. He had known everything before I said a word. He hadn't defended me once, because he didn't need to. He'd already made sure I looked guilty. When I got home, I couldn't sleep. I sat at the kitchen table with a cup of cold tea, replaying every detail of the evening. The fake emails, the timing of the invitation, Richard's presence. It was all too coordinated to be coincidence. The next morning I woke up to a message from Tessa. It was brief. "I need space. Please don't contact me for a while." I stared at the words, my chest tightening until I could barely breathe. She hadn't even signed it with love. Just those 6 cold, final words. I couldn't accept it. Not this time. I needed answers. By that afternoon, I was sitting in my car outside Tessa's house again. I knew it was reckless, maybe even pathetic, but I couldn't let her walk away believing lies. The curtains were drawn. Her car was in the driveway, but I didn't dare knock. Instead, I waited, watching, listening. After nearly an hour, I saw Derek step outside, talking on his phone. His tone was low, but his words carried in the quiet air. "I told you," he said sharply. "She bought every word. She won't question it." He paused, pacing slowly across the porch. "No, she doesn't know about Mom. She never will." My stomach dropped. She never will. I ducked lower in my seat, my hands trembling. His mother. Caroline. The woman Paul had left me for. I'd always suspected she was the reason behind everything, but hearing it confirmed made my blood run cold. Derek's mother had been Paul's mistress, and now her son was married to my daughter. The lines between revenge and family had blurred into something twisted and cruel. I listened as Derek continued speaking, his tone shifting from irritation to calm calculation. "She's fragile," he said. "Once she sees what kind of person her mother really is, she'll never go back." He paused. "It's what she deserves after what happened to Mom." My heart pounded. I couldn't hear the rest. I was shaking so badly that I accidentally bumped the steering wheel, making the horn blare for half a second. Derek's head snapped up. I ducked instantly, praying he hadn't seen me. After a tense few moments, he turned and went back inside. I drove away before my panic could paralyze me completely. My mind was spinning. Derek had known exactly what he was doing when he married Tessa. It wasn't love, it was vengeance. He'd targeted her because she was Paul's daughter, because I was her mother. When I got home, I called Sophie. She was the only person who might believe me. "Slow down, Lena," she said as I breathlessly recounted everything. "Are you sure about this? That's a huge accusation." "I heard him," I said. "With my own ears. He's been feeding her lies since the beginning. He's using her, Sophie." This was never about reconciliation, it was about punishment. Sophie was quiet for a long moment. "You need to tell Tessa." I tried. "She won't listen." "Then show her. Prove it." That night, I started going through old boxes, digging for anything that could connect Derek's mother, Caroline, to Paul. I found a few old photos, one of Paul and Caroline at a company event, another of them together at a Christmas party years ago. I remembered how Paul had lied to me about that party, saying it was just work. I tucked the photos into an envelope, hoping they would be enough to make Tessa question what she'd been told. The next morning, I sent her a message. "Please. I need to see you one last time. Just the two of us. I promise no arguing. I just want to talk." To my surprise, she replied, "Come by tonight. Derek won't be home." When I arrived that evening, Tessa looked exhausted. Her eyes were puffy. Her hair pulled into a messy bun. The tension between us was thick, but for the first time, I saw uncertainty in her expression. "What is it, Mom?" she asked. I handed her the envelope. "I need you to look at these." She hesitated, then opened it. Her hands trembled as she pulled out the photos. Her face went pale. That's Derek's mom," she whispered. I nodded. "She and your father were together before he died. Derek blames me for that. That's why he's doing this. He's trying to punish me and he's using you to do it." Her lips parted, but no sound came out. She sank into a chair, staring at the photos. "He never told me," she whispered. "He said his mother and dad were just friends." I knelt beside her. "Sweetheart, I know how hard it is to believe. But this is why everything happened. He's been lying to you. He forged those emails. He's turning you against me for something I didn't do." Tessa covered her mouth, shaking her head. "I don't know what to think anymore." Before I could say another word, the front door opened. We both froze. Derek's voice carried through the hallway, calm and composed as ever. "What's going on in here?" He stepped into the living room, his eyes landing on the photos in Tessa's hands. His jaw tightened, just for a second, but I saw it. Tessa looked up at him, her face pale. "Why didn't you tell me your mother was the woman Dad left Mom for?" Derek blinked slowly, then gave a small, chilling smile. "Because," he said softly, "it didn't matter. Not to us." Then his eyes flicked to me cold and dark. And with a voice that sent ice through my veins, he added, "This isn't over yet. Would you like me to continue with Section 8, the threat next?" "You said, Section 8J. Revenge Stories said, Section 8910 words." The threat. Derek's tone shifted from calm to menacing as he pulled out his phone and played a video. The moment his thumb hit play, my stomach dropped. The footage flickered to life, a recording of me at Paul's gravesite, but twisted, edited. In the clip, I was laughing, smirking even, as if mocking the headstone. The audio was distorted. The words warped. But the illusion was convincing enough to look real to anyone who didn't know better. Tessa gasped, her hands flying to her mouth. "What is this?" she whispered. Derek's lips curved into a slow, deliberate smile. "Proof," he said. "The kind people believe." I stared at him, in disbelief. "You did this? You doctored this?" He didn't answer, just tilted his head slightly. "All it takes is one upload, Elena, one post, and everyone will see who you really are." My heart pounded in my chest, every beat echoing in my ears. "You're sick," I said quietly. "You've gone too far." He took a step closer. "No," he said smoothly. "I'm setting the record straight. You spent years playing the victim, ruining lives with your lies. My mother died believing she wasn't enough because of you and your husband's twisted games. This," he waved the phone slightly, "is justice." Tessa's voice broke through, trembling and horrified. "Derek, stop, this isn't justice, you lied to me, you used me." For the first time, his calm expression cracked, his jaw tightened and his tone turned sharp. "I used you." "No, Tessa. I saved you from her. From years of manipulation. From a woman who lies every time she opens her mouth." "She's my mother," Tessa shouted, tears spilling down her cheeks. He looked at her like she was a stranger. "She doesn't deserve that title." I stepped between them before his anger could rise further. "Derek, whatever you think you're doing, whatever revenge you think this is, it ends now. You've done enough damage, leave her out of this." His eyes snapped to mine, cold and calculating. "You think this is about her? It's always been about you, Elena." He took another step closer, his voice lowering to a near whisper. "You ruined my mother's life. You took everything from her, her love, her dignity, her peace. I watched her cry for years over what your husband did. And when he died, you got to walk away clean, with sympathy and tears and everyone's pity. But I know the truth. You were the poison in both their lives." Every word landed like a knife. I wanted to scream that he was wrong, that he'd built his entire life around a lie, but something in his expression told me it wouldn't matter. He didn't want the truth. He wanted destruction. Tessa clutched her arms around herself, trembling. "Derek, please stop. This isn't who you are." He turned to her, his tone almost gentle now, dangerously calm. "You don't know who I am." The phone screen glowed in his hand, the paused video still showing my distorted face. "I could send this to every news outlet in town," he said softly. "Every friend, every coworker. Do you think anyone would believe you over me, Elena? Over a grieving husband trying to clear his mother's name?" My knees felt weak, but I stood my ground. If you post that, you'll only prove what you are, a coward hiding behind lies. He smiled faintly, almost admiringly. You always did have a way with words. Pity they won't save you. Richard's voice suddenly echoed from behind us. I hadn't even realized he'd come in through the front door. Enough, he said sharply. Derek, this isn't how we agreed to handle this. Tessa turned, shocked. Uncle Richard, you're here? He stepped forward, his expression conflicted. I told him to let the truth speak for itself, not to drag you into this madness. Derek's face hardened. The truth? You mean your version of it? Richard glared at him. She's not worth this, Derek. Let it go. Derek's hand tightened around his phone. You don't get to tell me when this ends. The tension in the room was unbearable. I could feel the energy shift, that fragile moment when anger could tip into violence. My eyes darted to the dining table, and that's when I saw it. The carving knife. The same one from dinner, still lying next to the untouched turkey platter, its blade glinting in the dim light. I took a cautious step toward it, my heart racing. Derek, I said softly, keeping my voice steady, you don't have to do this. I know you're hurting. But revenge won't fix what happened. He let out a short, bitter laugh. You think you understand pain? You think losing Paul compares to watching your mother die because of what he did to her? Paul made his own choices, I said firmly. He hurt both of us. But this isn't justice. It's cruelty. For a second, he hesitated. Just a flicker of doubt. I saw it in the way his eyes shifted, the way his breathing quickened. I used that moment. I lunged forward and grabbed the knife. Tessa screamed, stumbling backward. Mom, don't! I didn't raise it. I just held it out in front of me, my hands shaking. Stay away from her, I said through tears. You've done enough, Derek. He stared at me, expression unreadable, and then he smiled. You think I'm the one you should be afraid of? He said quietly. Richard reached for him, but Derek stepped back, keeping his distance. You'll regret this, he murmured. Both of you. Then he turned and walked out, leaving the door wide open behind him. The wind rushed in, cold and sharp. The room felt hollow after he left. But the silence didn't bring comfort. It brought dread. Tessa sank into a chair, sobbing. I didn't know any of this. I knelt beside her, placing the knife down carefully on the table. My hands were still trembling. It's over, I whispered, though I didn't believe it. It's going to be okay. But deep inside, I could feel it, the calm before the next storm. Derek's eyes before he walked out had said it all. And in that look, I knew the fight wasn't over, he was just getting started. Would you like me to continue with Section 9, the struggle next? You said, Section 9J Revenge Stories said, Section 9890 words, the struggle. In that split second, instinct took over. After Derek stormed out, the air in the room felt charged with static, like lightning waiting to strike. I stood there, clutching the carving knife, my chest heaving. Every nerve in my body screamed to run, but my mind couldn't keep up. Tessa was sobbing at the table, her hands shaking, and Richard stood frozen by the door, torn between anger and disbelief. He's not coming back, Richard said finally, his voice low. He just needs to cool off. I shook my head. You don't understand him, Richard. He's not calming down, he's planning something. The look he gave me told me he didn't want to believe it. But I knew that kind of rage, that quiet, dangerous focus that lives inside someone who's already decided what justice looks like. Derek wouldn't just walk away, he'd make sure to finish what he started. Tessa stood abruptly, wiping her tears. We should go, she said, her voice trembling. Let's just leave the house. Please, Mom. She was right. But before we could move, we heard a loud crash from outside, followed by the unmistakable sound of a car door slamming. Tessa's eyes widened. Oh God, he's back. Richard moved to the window, peeking through the blinds. His face went pale. He's got something in his hand, he whispered. I didn't wait to find out what it was. I grabbed Tessa's arm and pulled her toward the kitchen. Go out the back door, I said. We were halfway there when the front door burst open. Derek stood in the doorway, soaked from the rain, his face twisted with fury. In one hand he held his phone, in the other a half-empty bottle of whiskey. "So this is what betrayal looks like," he said, his voice dangerously calm. "The three of you whispering behind my back, making plans." "Derek, stop," Tessa said, stepping forward. "Please, you need help." He laughed bitterly. "Help? No, sweetheart. I need the truth." His gaze snapped to me. "Tell her, Elena. Tell her what you and Paul did to my mother. Tell her why she spent her last years drowning in pills while you played the victim. Mother so much he couldn't see past her pain." "Derek," I said softly, "your mother was a good woman, but she wasn't innocent. She knew Paul was married. She chose to be part of that affair. I didn't take anything from her, he did." His face twisted in rage. "Liar." He lunged toward me. I barely had time to react. I stumbled back, the knife still in my hand. Richard moved between us, trying to block him, but Derek shoved him hard. Richard hit the wall with a grunt and slid to the floor. Dazed. Tessa screamed. "Stop it! Both of you! Stop!" Derek turned on me again, his eyes wild. "You ruined her!" he shouted. "You ruined everything!" He swung his arm out, knocking the wine glasses off the table. The sound of shattering glass filled the room. I backed up until I hit the counter, my grip tightening around the knife. "Derek, please," I begged. "You're hurting the only person left who still cares about you. Look at Tessa." For a brief moment, his gaze flicked to her, his wife, trembling in the corner, tears streaming down her face. I saw the conflict flash across his expression. But then he looked back at me, and that softness vanished. "You don't get to talk to me about love," he hissed. He lunged again, grabbing my wrist. We struggled, the knife caught between us. His strength was terrifying. I could feel the blade pressing dangerously close to both our skin. "Let go!" I shouted. He tried to twist it from my hand, but I refused. I thought of Tessa, of all the years I'd spent trying to protect her, even from herself. I wasn't going to let him destroy what little we had left. In the chaos, Richard staggered to his feet and grabbed Derek's shoulder, trying to pull him back. Derek shoved him away, and the motion caused my arm to jerk. The knife slipped just a glancing movement, but it sliced across Derek's arm. He let out a sharp cry, stumbling backward as blood smeared down his sleeve. The knife clattered onto the floor. For a second, the world stopped. The sound of rain outside. Tessa's panicked breathing. The metallic scent of blood in the air. Then Derek looked up at me, his face pale but his eyes burning with fury. "You'll pay for this," he whispered, his voice shaking with venom. "You'll pay for all of it." He staggered toward the door, clutching his arm. Tessa rushed to stop him, but he shoved past her. "Don't touch me," he snarled, before stumbling out into the storm. The door slammed shut behind him, leaving a trail of red across the doorknob. I dropped to my knees, my whole body trembling. Tessa knelt beside me, sobbing. "Mom, I didn't know it would get this bad. I didn't know." I pulled her close, holding her as tightly as I could. "It's okay," I whispered, even though nothing was okay. "It's over. He's gone." But even as I said it, I knew that wasn't true. People like Derek didn't just disappear. They waited. They planned. They struck again when the world least expected it. Richard sat against the wall, breathing heavily. "We need to call the police," he said. Tessa nodded, fumbling for her phone with shaking hands. I stared at the blood stain on the floor, my reflection shimmering faintly in it under the flickering light. My hands were trembling uncontrollably. For a long moment, none of us spoke. The house felt hollow, like something sacred had been broken inside it. The sound of distant sirens finally pierced the silence. Relief and dread twisted together in my chest. And as the flashing lights appeared outside the window, I realized that even though the fight was over, the war Derek had started was only just beginning. "Would you like me to continue with Section 10, the aftermath, next?" "You said, Section 10J Revenge Stories said, Section 10870 words, the aftermath." The police arrived minutes later, after a neighbor heard the commotion and called 911. Their flashing red and blue lights painted the walls in sickening waves of color, making everything inside the house feel surreal. One officer took Derek's name from Tessa between sobs, while another gently pried the knife from where it had fallen near the counter. I sat on the floor, numb, my hands trembling uncontrollably, streaked with his blood. When they finally helped me to my feet, I tried to explain what had happened, that Derek attacked me, that it was self-defense, but my words came out broken, disjointed. The officers listened, calm and professional, while another team went outside to search for Derek. Richard, still pale and shaken, confirmed my story. He told them how Derek had come back furious, how he'd started the fight, how I was just trying to protect myself and Tessa. His voice quivered, but his account was steady enough to convince them I wasn't the aggressor. Tessa sat at the dining table, clutching a blanket one of the officers had given her. Her eyes were red, her cheeks streaked with tears. She looked like a child again. Small. I wanted to go to her, to hold her. But I was afraid she'd still see me as part of the chaos, part of the danger. After what felt like hours, one of the officers returned with an update. "We found him," he said quietly. "He's been taken to the hospital. Minor wound, nothing serious. He'll be questioned once he's stable." The words should have brought relief, but instead, they sent a chill through me. Derek was alive. Which meant this wasn't over. The officer assured me they would file a report and that I wouldn't be facing charges. "Given the circumstances," he said, "it's clearly self-defense." His tone was kind, but I could tell he'd seen this kind of thing before, the kind of domestic spiral that leaves everyone shattered in the end. Once the police left, the silence in the house returned, heavier than before. The only sound was the hum of the refrigerator and the occasional creak of the floorboards as we moved around, gathering what little composure we had left. Tessa approached me slowly, her voice barely audible. "Mom." I turned toward her. She looked exhausted, her shoulders trembling under the weight of everything that had just happened. "I'm so sorry," she whispered. "I didn't see it. I didn't know he was capable of this." I reached out and took her hand. For the first time in years, she didn't pull away. "You couldn't have known," I said softly. "He fooled all of us." She shook her head, tears spilling again. "No, I should have believed you. When you tried to tell me about Dad and Derek's mother, I just didn't want to believe that everything I knew about him was a lie." I cupped her face gently, brushing her tears away with my thumb. "You wanted to believe in love," I said. "There's no shame in that. I did too, once." Her lips quivered as she nodded, leaning into my hand like she used to when she was little. For the first time since that awful day at Paul's funeral, there was no anger between us, only grief and the fragile beginnings of understanding. Richard cleared his throat quietly. "You both should get some rest. I'll stay here tonight, just in case." Tessa nodded and disappeared down the hallway, heading to her room. I could hear her crying softly behind the closed door. I sat on the couch, staring at the dark window, the police lights fading in the distance. I thought about Paul. About the chain reaction his choices had started. His betrayal hadn't just broken our marriage, it had set fire to everything that came after. Derek's mother, Tessa's trust, even my own peace of mind. One lie had turned into a lifetime of consequences. When Sophie arrived later that night after I called her, she didn't ask questions. She just wrapped her arms around me and held me until I stopped shaking. "You're safe now," she whispered, though we both knew safety was a fragile word. We stayed up for hours, sitting in silence, sipping lukewarm tea. Every so often, Sophie would squeeze my hand as if to remind me I wasn't alone. The next morning, an officer called to say Derek had been discharged and taken into custody for questioning. He wasn't allowed to contact any of us. A restraining order would be filed. Tessa finally came out of her room after hearing the news, her face pale but determined. "Mom," she said quietly, "I'm filing for divorce." The strength in her voice startled me. For a moment, I just looked at her, realizing how much she'd grown up overnight. "Are you sure?" I asked. She nodded firmly. "Yes. I don't ever want to see him again." There was a calmness in her I hadn't seen in years, like the storm inside her had finally broken. We spent the rest of the morning cleaning what was left of the chaos. Broken glass, spilled wine, the faint stains of blood. It felt symbolic somehow, like wiping away years of pain one quiet motion at a time. As the day went on, exhaustion set in. Every muscle in my body ached, but my heart felt lighter. For the first time in years, Tessa and I were on the same side again. By evening, the house was quiet, the light outside fading to gold. Tessa sat beside me on the couch, resting her head on my shoulder. "I'm sorry for everything," she whispered. I wrapped my arm around her and kissed her hair. "We can start over," I said. "From here." For a long time we sat there in silence, just breathing together, the peace fragile but real. But deep down, I knew Derek's story wasn't finished, and that somewhere out there, his obsession was still burning, waiting for its next chance to ignite. "Would you like me to continue with Section 11, The Revenge Continues next?" You said. Section 11, J. Revenge. Stories said. Section 11910 words. The Revenge Continues. A few days later, I started receiving anonymous texts from an unknown number. At first, I thought they were random spam messages nonsense from a scammer, but then I opened one. My breath caught instantly. It was a photo. A still image from that night. I was in the frame, holding the knife, my eyes wide with fear. In the background, Derek was bleeding, his face twisted in pain. Below the image was a short message: "You'll never escape what you did." My phone slipped from my hands and clattered onto the kitchen counter, my stomach twisted. The police had taken all our statements. They'd said we were safe, that Derek wouldn't be able to contact us. But here he was still finding ways to reach me, still pulling strings from somewhere in the shadows. When Tessa walked into the kitchen, she saw the look on my face and froze. "What's wrong?" I hesitated before showing her the message. Her eyes widened, her face going pale. "It's him," she whispered. "It has to be." I nodded silently. That night, we went straight to the police station. They documented everything, assuring us they would trace the number. But they warned us that if Derek had been smart enough to use a burner phone, it might take time. "Just be cautious," the officer said. "Don't engage, don't respond, and make sure your doors and windows are secured." Cautious. The word didn't even begin to cover what I felt. Every sound outside made me flinch. Every car that slowed down near the house made my heart pound. I double-checked the locks 3 times every night before bed, and still, I barely slept. Tessa tried to act strong for both of us, but I could see the fear in her eyes. She'd filed for divorce like she'd promised, but the paperwork hadn't gone through yet. Part of me feared that meant Derek still had a legal tie to her another way in. A week passed. Then another message came. This time, it wasn't a photo. It was a video, grainy, dark, but recognizable. The outside of our house. The camera moved slowly up the driveway, stopping just short of the front door. The message attached read, "Miss me?" My hands shook so hard I could barely dial Sophie's number. She arrived within 20 minutes. Her face set with protective fury. "He's stalking you," she said bluntly. "He's trying to scare you into breaking." I nodded, tears streaming down my face. "He's already broken me." But she wouldn't let me surrender. Sophie helped me install cameras around the house, motion sensors, and extra locks. The police increased patrols in the area. But despite all the security, I couldn't shake the feeling that Derek was always one step ahead, like he knew what I'd do before I did it. One night, while I was washing dishes, I caught a flicker of movement outside the window. I froze. The shape was gone as quickly as it appeared. But I knew what I saw, a shadow, tall and unmistakable. I called out for Tessa, my voice trembling. We turned off the lights, standing quietly in the dark, listening. The air outside was still. Then, faintly, there was a sound, footsteps on gravel. Moving away from the house. Tessa wanted to call the police again, but I told her not to. "We need evidence," I said. "If we call now, he'll just disappear again before they get here." The next morning, I checked the security footage from the cameras Sophie had helped install. My heart nearly stopped. At 11:42 p.m., a figure appeared at the edge of the frame. Derek. He was standing in the rain, looking straight at the camera. He didn't move for almost a full minute. Then, slowly, he lifted something in his hand, a piece of paper, and pressed it against the lens. When I paused the footage, I saw what it said, scrawled in his handwriting. "I see you." That was the moment I knew Derek wasn't just trying to scare me. He was taunting me, controlling the narrative the way he always had. We turned everything over to the police again. They promised to assign an officer to keep an eye on the property. But as the days passed, and Derek remained unseen, even the officers began to sound uncertain. "He's careful," one said. "He's not leaving enough behind for us to trace." Tessa and I started staying with Sophie some nights, but even there, the anxiety followed me. I'd wake up in the middle of the night, certain I heard footsteps outside, or the faint vibration of my phone with another message. Sometimes it was blank. Sometimes it was just one word. "Soon." Each time, I felt like the walls were closing in tighter. Tessa was unraveling too. She'd jump at sudden sounds, avoid going outside alone, and barely ate. I could see the guilt gnawing at her. She blamed herself for bringing Derek into our lives, even though none of it was her fault. "I should have known," she said one night, her voice barely above a whisper. "He always wanted to know everything about Dad, about you. I thought he cared. I didn't realize it was obsession." I held her hand tightly. "You couldn't have known, sweetheart. Evil doesn't show its face until it's ready to be seen." But the truth was, I didn't believe my own words anymore. Evil didn't just hide, it planned, it studied, and it struck when you thought you were finally safe. A few days later, I came home from the grocery store to find something taped to the front door. It was an envelope. My heart started pounding before I even touched it. The handwriting on the front was familiar, Derek's. I ripped it off the door and took it inside, my hands shaking. Inside was a single folded letter. I didn't even have to read it to know it was another threat. But when I did, my breath caught in my throat. Because this time, it wasn't just a message, it was a promise. "Would you like me to continue with Section 12, the letter next?" You said, Section 12J Revenge. Stories said, Section 12900 words. The letter. My hands shook as I opened the envelope, fearing what I'd find inside. The paper inside was thick, creased, and slightly damp from the rain. Derek's handwriting was unmistakable, precise and deliberate, each letter etched like a wound. The ink had bled slightly, but the words were still readable. "You think you can erase me?" it began. "You think you can hide behind the police, behind your daughter, behind the pity of strangers? You took everything from my mother, and now I'll take everything from you. Slowly. Piece by piece. Until there's nothing left." I read the words twice before they truly sank in. My vision blurred. The room felt smaller, suffocating. At the bottom of the page, there was something taped to the paper, a torn photograph. I peeled it back and froze. It was a photo of Tessa and me from years ago, one she'd kept on her dresser as a teenager. We were both smiling, our arms around each other. But the picture had been ripped in half. Derek had drawn a thick, jagged line of black ink between our faces, splitting us apart. I dropped the letter on the table, my fingers trembling uncontrollably. "He was here," I whispered. "He put this on the door himself." Tessa came into the kitchen, alarmed by the tone of my voice. "What happened?" I handed her the letter, unable to speak. As she read it, her face turned pale. "Oh my God," she breathed. "He's threatening you." "Not just me," I said quietly. "Us." We called the police again, and when they arrived, the same officer from before, Officer Grant, took the letter and sealed it in an evidence bag. "We'll run prints," he said, though his tone carried doubt. "But this guy's good. He's covering his tracks." Tessa's voice cracked. "What if he comes back?" Grant sighed. "If he does, you call us immediately. Day or night, don't try to confront him. And don't open your door to anyone you don't know." After he left, the house felt emptier than ever. Even the air seemed to hum with tension. I sat at the kitchen table long after Tessa had gone to a bed, staring at the space where the letter had been, my mind running through every possibility. How close had Derek been when he left it? Did he watch me through the window afterward? The next few days were a blur. I tried to act normal, to keep Tessa calm, but every sound made me jump. The creak of the stairs, the knock of a branch against the window. Even the hum of the refrigerator felt ominous. I slept on the couch most nights, too afraid to be far from the front door. Tessa refused to go back to work. "I can't leave you alone," she said. I wanted to argue, to tell her she needed to keep living her life, but the truth was, I was grateful for her presence. After everything, just knowing she was in the next room made the fear bearable. A few nights later, we decided to cook together. It was the first time in weeks that the house smelled like something other than anxiety and cold air. As we chopped vegetables, I caught a small smile on her face, tired but genuine. It reminded me of all those years ago when she'd stand on a chair beside me, helping me mix pie filling, her laughter spilling through the kitchen. "Remember how we used to fight over who got to lick the spoon?" I asked softly. She laughed through a sigh. "Yeah. And you always pretended to let me win." For the first time in so long, it felt like we were healing. Like the shadows were finally thinning. But peace never lasted long in Derek's world. The doorbell rang just as we sat down to eat. Tessa stiffened. "Who could that be?" I looked at the clock. It was nearly 10 at night. My pulse quickened. "Don't open it," I whispered. We both froze. The bell rang again, followed by a slow, deliberate knock. "Police?" A man's voice called through the door. "It's Officer Grant, just checking in. We got a few reports about suspicious activity in the area." Tessa looked at me uncertainly. "Should we?" I hesitated. The voice sounded like him. Calm. Familiar. But something in my gut twisted. "Ask for ID," I whispered. Tessa called out. "Can you show your badge through the window?" There was a pause, just a few seconds too long. Then the voice came again. Sharper this time. "Just open the door, ma'am. It's freezing out here." My stomach dropped. The tone had changed. That polite, even cadence was gone. I shook my head quickly, motioning for Tessa to stay back. "That's not him," I mouthed. The next sound was soft but unmistakable, the jingle of the doorknob being tested. I grabbed my phone with shaking hands and dialed 911. My voice was barely a whisper as I explained what was happening. The dispatcher told me to stay on the line, to keep quiet, to wait for responding units. We crouched behind the kitchen island, holding our breath. Every second stretched into eternity. Then came a faint scraping sound, like metal against glass. Someone was trying to pry open the window. Tessa's hand found mine, squeezing it so tightly it hurt. The dispatcher's voice murmured through the phone, "Officers are 3 minutes out. Stay hidden." The noise stopped. Silence. Then, footsteps retreating. The front door creaked faintly. I didn't breathe again until the real officers arrived, their flashlights sweeping through the yard. The imposter Derek was gone. When they checked the front door, they found fresh mud on the porch and new fingerprints on the handle. The tracks led down the driveway, disappearing into the woods behind the house. Tessa broke down completely when they left. "He's never going to stop," she sobbed. "He'll keep coming until one of us is gone." I held her close, tears burning my eyes. "He's trying to make us afraid," I said softly. "But we're not going to let him win. Not again." Even as I said it, my voice wavered. Because I knew Derek. I knew how patient he could be. And just when I started to believe the danger had passed, the doorbell rang. Again, only this time, I could see his silhouette through the glass. "Would you like me to continue with Section 13? The confrontation next?" "You said, Section 13J Revenge," Stories said. Section 13910 words. The confrontation. I opened the door, and there he was, Derek, standing in the rain, his eyes hollow and wild. His clothes were soaked, his hair plastered to his forehead, and yet there was something eerily calm about him, like the storm outside had spilled into him and settled there. Water dripped from his jacket, pooling on the porch, but he didn't seem to feel it. his gaze locked on mine, cold and unblinking. "Derek," I whispered, barely able to breathe. "You need to leave." He took one slow step forward. "We need to talk," he said. "Just you and me." Behind me, I heard Tessa's voice tremble. "Mom, don't." He shifted his eyes toward her, and something flickered in them. Not love, not remorse, possession. "Hello, sweetheart," he said softly. "You shouldn't be afraid of me. I'd never hurt you." "Then why are you here?" she cried. "Why won't you stop?" He looked back at me, rainwater streaming down his face. "Because your mother never told you the truth," he said. "And until she does, none of us can move on." His words sent a shiver through me. He was twisting reality again, shaping his own version of it, until even he believed the lies he'd built. I could see it in his eyes, the mania, the obsession, the conviction that he was the victim. I stepped outside, closing the door behind me. The cold rain instantly soaked through my clothes, but I didn't care. "You want to talk?" I said. "Fine, but you talk to me, not her." Derek's mouth curved into a small, almost tender smile. "Always the protector," he said. "You act like you're noble, but everything you do ends in destruction. Paul, my mother. Now me. Your mother destroyed herself," I said, my voice firm. "She was having an affair with a married man. That wasn't my doing. That was hers and your father's." His face twisted. "Don't you dare talk about her that way." The flash of fury that crossed his face made my pulse race. He stepped closer until I could smell the whiskey on his breath. His voice dropped to a low, dangerous growl. "You took everything from her. And now I'm taking everything from you." I didn't back down. "You've already tried. You lied. You manipulated Tessa. You invaded our home. And still, you haven't won. You'll never win, Derek." Something in my tone must have pushed him further. He reached into his jacket pocket, and my breath caught when I saw it, a glint of metal. "Derek," I said slowly, raising my hands. "Whatever that is, you don't want to do this." He tilted his head slightly, a cruel smirk forming. "Don't I?" From behind the door, Tessa's muffled scream broke through. "Mom, get back inside, the police are on their way." Derek's smile faltered for a split second. "You called them again?" he asked, his voice cracking. I didn't answer. I couldn't. My eyes were locked on his hand, where the metallic shape now glimmered fully under the porch light. It was a knife smaller than the one from before, but sharp enough to make my blood run cold. "You've taken everything from me," he whispered. "But I'm going to make sure you remember me forever." "Please," I said softly, taking a step forward. "You don't have to do this. You've already hurt us enough. Don't ruin what's left of your life." He let out a hollow laugh. "My life ended the day she did." The rain fell harder, blurring the world into streaks of gray and shadow. I could feel the weight of every second, every heartbeat, as Derek lifted the knife slightly, his hand trembling. For the first time, I saw not just rage but exhaustion, pain, madness carved deep into his soul. "Derek," I said, my voice trembling but steady enough to reach him. "You want to blame someone for what happened to your mother? Blame Paul, not me. He made the promises. He broke them. He lied to you, to her, to me. He's the one who destroyed us all." His eyes flickered, confusion breaking through the anger for just a moment. He loved her. He used her," I said. "And when he was done, he left her with nothing." "I know that kind of pain, Derek. I lived it too." The rain softened to a mist, the silence between us heavy and fragile. For a moment, I thought I'd reached him. His grip on the knife loosened slightly. His shoulders dropped. And then, in the distance, red and blue lights appeared, cutting through the darkness. The sound of sirens grew louder. Derek's head jerked toward them, and panic flashed across his face. "They called the cops," he muttered. "You always find someone to clean up your messes." He stepped back, the knife still clutched in his hand. "You don't get to win, Elena." The sirens grew louder, closer, the headlights of the approaching cars reflecting off the wet pavement. "Put it down!" a voice shouted through a megaphone. "Drop the weapon and step away from her." Derek froze, breathing hard. For a moment I thought he might do it, surrender, end this nightmare. But instead, he looked at me one last time, his expression hollow, broken. "You'll see me again," he said quietly. "You always do." Before I could move, he dropped the knife onto the porch, turned and walked toward the edge of the yard. The police swarmed around him, shouting orders, tackling him into the mud. The lights, the shouting, the chaos, all of it blurred together as I stood there, numb, drenched, shaking. Tessa burst out of the house, running toward me, throwing her arms around my soaked shoulders. "It's over," she sobbed. "It's finally over." I held her tight, my heart still racing. I wanted to believe her. I wanted to believe that Derek being taken away meant the end of it. But as the officers led him toward the car, he turned his head just slightly, catching my eye through the rain. His lips curved into the faintest, most chilling smile I'd ever seen. And in that haunting grin, I realized that for Derek, this wasn't the end, it was only the pause before whatever came next. "Would you like me to continue with Section 14, Healing from the Wreckage next?" You said. Section 14J Revenge, stories said. Section 14920 words. Healing from the Wreckage. The police arrested Derek that night, and for the first time in a long while, I felt safe again. Watching him, being led away in handcuffs under the flash of red and blue lights, should have felt like victory. But it didn't. It felt hollow. The rain was still falling, steady and relentless, as if the sky itself refused to let the night end. Tessa clung to me on the porch, shaking uncontrollably. We didn't speak, we just held on to each other until the last cruiser disappeared down the street. When the house finally went quiet again, the silence was deafening. Every room felt haunted by what had happened. The wine stains on the floor, the broken glass near the table, the faint outline of muddy footprints at the door, all traces of chaos that no amount of cleaning could fully erase. Tessa fell asleep on the couch that night, wrapped in a blanket and still wearing her wet clothes. I sat beside her, watching her chest rise and fall, realizing how close I'd come to losing her again. Not just to Derek's madness, but to my own silence. For years I had avoided telling her the full truth about Paul, thinking I was protecting her. In the end, that silence had been the crack that let all of this darkness in. The following morning, the world seemed calmer. The air was crisp, the storm gone, and sunlight streamed through the windows for the first time in weeks. Officer Grant stopped by to give us an update. Derek was in custody and would face multiple charges: trespassing, harassment, assault, and violating a restraining order. They also found his car nearby inside, a stash of letters, printed photos, and recordings he'd collected over the past few months. He'd been documenting everything about us, planning every move. When the officer left, Tessa sat quietly at the kitchen table, staring into her untouched cup of coffee. "I don't understand how someone I loved could do all of that," she said softly. "How do you even recover from something like that?" I took her hand in mine. "You don't recover all at once," I said. "You heal slowly, piece by piece, and sometimes you carry the scars forever. But scars aren't weakness, Tessa, they're proof that you survived." Her eyes filled with tears. "You still love me, after everything?" I smiled through my own. "You're my daughter. I'll always love you. There's nothing you could ever do to change that." That day marked the beginning of something new, not perfect, not easy, but real. We made a promise to each other: no more secrets, no more silence. We spent the next few days cleaning the house together. It was therapeutic in a strange way, sweeping away the remnants of fear, scrubbing the blood from the floor, patching up what could be fixed. The damage wasn't just physical, it was emotional, buried deep in every memory. But as we worked side by side, we really talked for the first time in years. About Paul. About the divorce. About the pain we both carried but never shared. "I blamed you for everything," Tessa admitted one afternoon as she wiped the counter. "I thought you were the reason Dad was so sad before he died. I thought you drove him away." I nodded, not angry, just tired. "I know. And I let you think that because I didn't want you to hate him. I wanted you to have good memories, even if it meant you hated me instead. She set the rag down and turned to me. Eyes glistening. You shouldn't have protected him, Mom. You should have protected yourself. Her words hit harder than I expected. Maybe she was right. Maybe all those years of trying to keep peace had only built walls between us. But hearing her say it, acknowledging my pain, was its own kind of healing. As Thanksgiving approached again, I couldn't help but think about how much had changed. The table was smaller now, quieter. No fancy dishes, no guests, just the two of us and Sophie. We didn't need a feast, we needed peace. Sophie brought over a pie, smiling softly as she set it down. I figured you'd had enough of drama for one lifetime, she joked gently. More than enough, I said with a tired laugh. We spent that evening in simple warmth. Tessa and I cooked together, humming along to quiet music. And for the first time in years, the air in the house didn't feel heavy. The aroma of roasted chicken and spiced cranberries filled the kitchen. When we sat down to eat, Tessa reached across the table and took my hand. I don't think I ever said it, she whispered. Thank you for not giving up on me. Tears stung my eyes. I couldn't, I said. You're the only part of my life that ever mattered. We ate in silence after that, not out of tension, but out of peace. The kind of silence that doesn't hurt anymore. Later that night, as the fire crackled softly, Tessa pulled out one of the old photo albums I'd kept hidden in the closet. We flipped through it together. Every picture was a reminder of what we'd lost, but also of what we still had. When she turned to a page of her as a little girl, holding Paul's hand, she smiled sadly. I don't hate him anymore, she said quietly. I don't forgive him, but I don't hate him. That's enough, I said. Forgiveness doesn't always mean forgetting. It just means letting go of the weight. Before bed, Tessa hugged me tightly longer than she had in years. I love you, Mom, she said into my shoulder. I love you too, sweetheart. More than anything. After she went upstairs, I stood alone by the window, watching the quiet street outside. The world was calm again. No shadows, no strange cars, no threats, just stillness. But even in the quiet, I could still feel the faint echo of what we'd survived. It would never completely disappear, it had changed us, both of us, but maybe that was okay. Maybe surviving was its own kind of victory. As I turned off the lights and looked toward the small table set for two, I thought about everything that had happened. The lies, the pain, the loss, and the unexpected strength that had grown out of all of it. We'd rebuilt something fragile, something honest. Not perfect, but real. And for the first time in a very long time, that felt like enough. And 10 days before Thanksgiving, I learned that sometimes, the family you lose is the one that saves you in the end.